All right, so let's get started with the real show. So just like 2 minutes about us, and then we will start for real. So Ellis and I are part of a company called Blue Seedling. We work with fast-growing Israeli B2B startups as their marketing team. So we come in as a plug-and-play marketing team for startups who typically raise the Series A, sometimes even a Series B, sometimes after their seed round, where they want to scale their marketing capabilities and they don't necessarily want to wait until they hire the perfect marketing team. They just want to make progress, and that's where we come in. A few of the companies we currently work with here in Israel or here, you might be familiar with some of them. Prior to Blue Seedling, I worked at Amazon for 3 years in marketing, and I was head of marketing at a B2B startup called Castor in New York. I'm based in New York, Ellis is based in Israel. We have a couple of additional team members in the US, in Brooklyn and Columbus, Ohio. Because why not? And that's it about us. Obviously, if you have any questions, happy to share more afterwards. And throughout the workshop today, you'll be, basically the entire workshop is built around case studies and success stories, and most of them will be from these companies. So everything is real life stories, and you'll be seeing examples from all of these guys. Okay, cool. So I chose to start with this presentation because personally this is one of the marketing tactics I'm most excited about. I think it can really make a difference for small startups, especially here in Israel, where we're sometimes a bit far from the US or markets in general. And we have very small, limited marketing team and resources, and we still want to make a lot of noise, just like our bigger competitors. And I think this tactic is one of the ways that we can achieve it. And this one as well, it's just going to be based on 2 case studies where it really worked. So I'm really excited to share it with you. And I want to start with a story. So this is Castor. It's the startup I worked with before starting Blue Seedling, and this is the entire company around 2013. So it's about, I think, 11 people in a pretty small office, about this size in New York. Pretty disgusting office. It was me and 10 guys. And this is Castor's marketing team back then. So it was basically me. Marketing, content, PR, you name it. And in terms of the marketing team's prior content and PR experience, well, I've always loved to read. That was the extent of my PR experience. So that's the context. We also had a very creative director, so he thought that this is like a nice company photo. That's why we all look like I don't know, serial killers or just like weirdos. Anyway, it's memorable, if nothing else. So I want to jump now to kind of the end of the story, and I want to show you, I started working at Castor in July 2013. I want to show you an email I got in November 2013, so less than 6 months in. So imagine me, it's November, it's really cold, I'm sitting in this kind of gross office in New York. I get this email from Christina Haley Allen, who's a producer at Bloomberg, and she's asking me, is he, meaning our CEO Corey, is he available for TV on Bloomberg's Bottom Line with anchor Mark Crompton on Monday? Okay, so, and you can see my email to her. Essentially, I sent her an email about some data analysis that we just published. This was on Black Friday when I sent her the email, so one of the biggest shopping days in the US. She was asking about Monday, it's Cyber Monday. essentially, I was like, we published some new holiday e-commerce sales data based on our own data. And here are some stats, and our CEO is available for interviews if you're interested. And she replied, can he come and be on TV? So just imagine, you know, I was sitting there and they tell you that the best moments in life are not in front of your computer screen. Well, this was a pretty good moment in my life. It was pretty cool. And what happened was that, he did end up going on TV that November. And over the course of the 3 years that I was there, every year we would run essentially the same campaign around the holidays, and we'd also run monthly updates of the same data analysis. And you can see he was on TV a couple of additional times. This is another highlight. So at some point, Tim Cook, who's Apple's CEO, he quoted one of our data analysis figures in one of Apple's quarterly earnings calls. So he actually referred to our research, which was back then about how many e-commerce transactions are done on Apple iPads. He quoted it on an Apple earnings call. We had a few developers at the company, which after this happened, they were like, okay, we can just quit. We reached like the best moment of our professional lives. They were also like, you know, serious Apple fanboys, but this was pretty cool. And then this one, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Bloomberg terminal, but it's essentially a data terminal that's used by hundreds of thousands of finance professionals in the world, and at some point they integrated our e-commerce data into the Bloomberg professional terminal. So it's pretty cool to see like our data on like a Bloomberg green screen. So these were some of the highlights, and then on a regular basis we just got mentions in a ton of industry-specific publications, which in our case was e-commerce and retail. So publications like Internet Retailer, Retailing Today, Total Retail, but also mainstream news and media like Fortune and Forbes and the Washington Post and Inc. and so on, and the Journal, of course. What's cool here is that you can see Business Insider quoting our data right next to similar figures from IBM and Adobe. So it's like Castora, the 20 people startup, next to IBM and Adobe, slightly bigger companies. So as you can see, it was a very successful marketing tactic, and I started with this not as like a humble brag or even like a real brag, but because I wanted to show you that what I'm going to show you next, and I'm going to tell you exactly how it did this, I wanted to show you that it's working. And we really got to all of that as initially an 11-person startup. Today, Castora is about 60 people, but these were the resources we had. Initially, the marketing team was myself. Eventually it grew a bit, but this is something, it's doable. And you all can reach similar results, and there's nothing, there's no rocket science here. So now that I'm done with the story, let's talk a bit about how we did it and about something called data journalism. So just for my own curiosity, how many people here have heard of data journalism before today? Okay, cool. So a few, which is good. Cool, so what is data journalism? So this is an example from the New York Times. Anyone familiar with this? It's from like a few years ago. Essentially, the New York Times put up this interactive survey where according to how you say specific words in English, they can predict which region of the country you're from. So for example, they ask you essentially, how do you call it, garage sale? So I think in the East, in the Northeast, or whatever you call it, a stoop sale. In other places, you call it a yard sale. So they had a bunch of questions like that, 25 questions like that, and based on your answers, they could predict where you're from. So pretty cool. And I mean, there are so many more examples today, and I'm sure you've seen dozens of these. So the New York Times has an entire section called the Upshot, which is based on data analysis and visualizations. Bloomberg is famous for its interactive graphics. So essentially, I'm talking about journalism that's based on data and analysis and not just narrative. So combining data analysis and visualizations with media reporting journalism. Another example from the Washington Post, they publish so many of these data visualizations and analysis that at the end of every year for the past few years, they've been compiling like the best of. Cool. So how is that related to all of you, and what's the opportunity here? So this is again from that New York Times dialect quiz that I just showed you at the beginning. And what you can see here that the New York Times, even the mighty New York Times, didn't have the data or the analysis required to construct this survey on its own. So in their case, they relied on data from Harvard. So it's a linguistic project from Harvard from 2002, run by 2 scientists and so on. So again, even the Times don't have this kind of data. So they go out to external sources, use their data, and then build the journalism and the reporting layer on top of it. So for us as startups and technology companies, that means that each one of us with our data can partner with many different types of publications to present ourselves and our data in these publications. So a few examples here of companies that are very different. So Jawbone, it's a hardware consumer company. OkCupid is a data insight, so also B2C. Chartbeat is a B2B analytics startup. App Annie is another B2B analytics startup. So different types of startups and companies. And same with the publications themselves. So some of these here are like mainstream mass media, like the Journal and Forbes and the Times. Some of them are niche and industry-specific publications, like Marketing Land and CIO.com. And even apparently this is the leading journal for agriculture, farm journal. So if you're selling into farmers or big farms, then you definitely want to be in Farm Journal. And also local publications. So if for some reason you're selling to Israeli startups, then Geek Time is not a bad place for you to be. Cool. And here's an example of that in action. So this is data analysis from App Annie, which is a startup that provides App Store analytics. And when, I don't know if you remember, but it actually happens all the time now, Lyft and Uber in the US. There were a bunch of like Uber scandals, and then App Annie kind of rode this wave and released this analysis that showed that Lyft was gaining on Uber. And they got it placed in a very prominent location in a Washington Post article. Make sense so far? Cool. Another example, Zillow. It's a real estate listing site. They did a whole data analysis on how whenever a Starbucks opens in a neighborhood or town in the US, real estate prices go up. And this was like a huge publicity magnet for them. So there was a term that was coined, the Starbucks effect. They got a ton of press out of it. They even later on wrote a book based on all the data analysis that they did. So a couple of examples, and now why I'm so excited to talk specifically about this topic. Okay, so data journalism is a form of content marketing, but as you might know, and what I definitely believe based on my experience, content marketing is really hard. So this is an example of some content topics from my previous company, Castora, the same company. It was a customer segmentation and analytics product, and this is the first Google search result when you Google customer segmentation. So you can see here content from Bain, from Optimove, which was one of their big competitors, from Shopify, from Wikipedia, from Harvard Business Review, from Marketing Land. So if we were to write something about customer segmentation, the odds of us getting somewhere worthwhile on Google, pretty slim. Not to mention that we would have had to invest time and knowledge and effort and resources into writing the content. So it's very competitive. It's hard to stand out. All of this content is kind of similar anyway, so even if a potential prospect would have landed on our article, would they have been impressed with it? Maybe, maybe not. So it's just really hard. And on the other hand, data journalism, I would argue, is content marketing that actually works. So what happens with content marketing, you typically invest a lot of time and resources and actual dollars into creating the content, and then you publish the content and you get crickets. Yes, thank you. Because it's really hard to get distribution. Like I showed you, Google is really competitive. And investing in content distribution, for example, through Facebook or LinkedIn or industry publications with a paid campaign, it's really expensive. So that's the typical flow. As opposed to data journalism, where the investment in the content itself can be minimal because most of it is the data analysis. It's not about the writing or the length of the content and so on. It's mostly everything is based on the analysis itself, and then distribution, because that relies on PR, then it can be really massive. So all these examples that I showed you before that we got at Castora, like Forbes and the Journal and TV and so on, this is like massive scale that we never could have gotten if we were just to write an article about customer segmentation. Yeah.
Out of how many other analysis did you do that had zero recognition? Because one of the problems is it's very if this analysis is very interesting and gets to Forbes, great, but you can do 50 analysis and get zero publication.
Totally. So that's a really good question. So let me tell you a bit more about what we actually did. And I'll definitely show you examples where it didn't necessarily work or it worked in a much smaller scale. Cool. So now I want to show you the actual playbook or the case study or how we did it at Castora as like a one-person team and so on. So just a tiny bit about what Castora does, so you'll have the context. So it's an e-commerce marketing analytics product for large e-commerce retailers. So on the left, you can see a couple of screenshots from the product. And here you can see a few of Castora's customers. So as you can see, big US retailers. And by way of working with all of these companies, Castora had access to all of their transaction data. So who purchased what, when, for how much, and so on. So definitely we were very fortunate to have access to plenty of data at our fingertips. So that's that's a prerequisite. I mean, if you don't have data, good data, a lot of data, it's going to be hard to do data journalism. Cool. So that's the end result. So ultimately, we had a monthly benchmark on our website called the Castor e-commerce pulse on castor.com/pulse, where every month we published a new monthly batch of data. So you can see examples. We would publish, for example, the breakdown of orders by device, or people shopping on tablet, phones, or desktop. Published orders by marketing channels, or people buying from email marketing or from Google or from social media. So these kind of stats that if you're a retailer, these things are very interesting for you, which is cool because retailers are our potential customers. And in the media, so this is mostly interesting if you're a retail or marketing trade publication. But during the holiday time frame, this becomes interesting for mass media as well. So to your earlier point, by the way, most of the year, this did not interest the Wall Street Journal. Like, the journal doesn't care on a monthly basis if iPhone orders are going up or down. So most of the year, we would pitch this to Marketing Land or Total Retail or Internet World, and they would like eat it up. So we would get this published on a monthly basis in these trade publications, which was great because that's what our prospects read. During the holiday time frame, so November, December, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we'd start pitching this to the Journal, Forbes, Times, USA Today, and so on, because that time of the year, it was interesting for them. So how did we build this? The screenshots I showed you, like the nice dashboard and so on, this took a while. Initially, when we started, it was me working with our data scientists to define a set of interesting analysis questions that to me sounded interesting, and him actually running the analysis. So I gave him a set of about 10 questions, like order breakdown and device and geo and so on. He ran the analysis like manually as a one-off, and we saw which analysis were even possible and which returned interesting results. And then once I had that, I started pitching it. And every time we wanted to do it again, he'd manually run the analysis again. So initially it was just him and me, very like project-based. It wasn't like a product or anything official or automated that we wanted to develop. After the first cycle, when we saw this was having the seeds of being something successful, we decided to invest more effort into it. And then he wrote like a bunch of scripts to automate it. And a year in, we had the dashboard and we had like scripts that would pull the analysis on a monthly basis in an automated way and so on. But we definitely started very small and manually. And like you asked before, if we were to run an analysis, and I had some research questions that he ran and the results were just like not interesting or maybe even like invalid because we didn't have enough data. So we just kind of abandoned them. And we focused on the few questions that were interesting and that press was interested in as well. And then we decided what to automate and so on. So very gradual, very like, here's the MVP, and then build on that and iterate and see what's working, kind of like with like a real product. Make sense? Cool. Okay, now with regards to distribution, so how did we pitch it and how did I get to Christina, who's the producer at Bloomberg? So we built a list of relevant journalists in both mainstream media publications as well as all the trade publications, and we used a website called Upwork. How many people here are familiar? Okay, pretty much everyone, so that's good. Erez is going to give a whole presentation about using Upwork for many other purposes. But essentially, Upwork found all of these contact details of all of these reporters for us. And then I essentially emailed them. So in the first year, I emailed something like 900 reporters. And yeah, one of them was that Bloomberg producer, and she got back to me. Later on, we moved to tools like MailChimp for email and to Marketo, which is like a bigger email marketing and marketing automation platform. But initially, it was literally from my Gmail with like a mail merge sort of thing. So nothing too sophisticated on that end either. Like, they're not costly, and they also didn't require a lot of people. When we got a bit more sophisticated, we started also distributing this content with partners, which is something that I recommend anyway, not just for data journalism, but for any marketing campaign that you run. I think this is one of the best ways for small startups to become or appear bigger than they really are. So here are some of the other companies that we partnered with to distribute content. And I don't know if you're familiar, but all of these are startups or tech companies in a similar space to Castora, so also selling to online retailers, but much, much bigger. So sometimes like orders of magnitude bigger than Castora. And we partnered with them. So this is an example where we partnered with Marketo, which is a huge company with a gigantic audience, and we did a holiday webinar with them, again, based on our holiday data analysis. So we would do webinars with them, we do events, we do cross-posting on their blog, and it's not like we had a huge business development or partnership team. Again, it was just me like reaching out to their marketing people, sometimes just like via LinkedIn, and be like, oh, do you want to do something together? We have this analysis based on our data, and we work with all of these retailers. Do you want to team up for a webinar? And more often than not, the answer was yes, because it's a win-win for both of us, so why not? Another thing we always did with data journalism and this data analysis is we would leverage it for an omni-channel or multi-channel marketing campaign. So we had the analysis, and then we would create email marketing campaigns off of it, or a web landing page or a blog post. We would do a webinar based on it. We would pitch it to press, of course. We even sometimes would do a print report, because that's just fun and beautiful. So once you have the core content kernel, there's so much that you can do on top of it in various formats to kind of serve it to your audience wherever they are. Some people like getting emails, some people like reading, some people like to read printed stuff. Cool. And so that was the Castora story, and so that you don't think I'm a one-trick pony. Thank you. Yes. I want to show you a similar case study of using the same strategy of data journalism with a completely different company. Yes.
So one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Castora was a data analytics platform. So
mm-hmm.
Posting analytics makes a lot of sense in the conversion. If you are in a very different domain, do you still see it as something attractive in terms of conversion? Because if you are, I don't know, souvenir box startup, and you post some data, then maximum you have is you sign off as a data source.
Yeah. So I'll show you the second case study, which is a non-analytics company, and then we have an exercise actually where you all get to do your own data journalism brainstorm. So my answer is yes. I think it's suitable for way more than just analytics, even though, yes, with analytics it was like a perfect storm in a way. Do you guys want to Sid,
Yeah.
by the way? Yeah, go for it. And you also had a question?
I wanted to ask, when you sent the initial data analysis that you had, did you run it through a designer or a professional writer, or you just made like a good-looking graph and decided with a short passage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know when you came in, but the answer is essentially no. So if we go all the way back to the beginning of the story, so when we just got started, we didn't do anything to prettify the data. So this is what I sent the reporters.
Yeah.
Like, it's text only. The only thing here is content and data, and that's enough, because at that time of the year to this person, this was relevant, timely, interesting. So I didn't need to create an infographic or to even write it up, because again, I'm not a writer, I'm not even like a native English speaker, but this is very easy because it's a bunch of numbers. Which is another huge advantage that this has for us, because if we're not writers, if we're not native speakers, the data speaks for itself. It's not about a well-crafted narrative or like beautiful graphics. Cool. So, yeah.
First of all, I love those things. I follow Bloomberg, the infographics of Bloomberg, and it works with me. So
Yeah.
I do believe in it. Like we as a startup, we have a lot of priorities, right? And to build a project like this, you need to prioritize sometimes developers. In our case, that's the case.
Yeah.
We have a project in the idea to do it. The issue that I have is how do we build a return on investment at the end of the day? Because I need to prioritize versus, I don't know, a feature for a sales deal,
Yeah.
rather than a marketing campaign, which PR, it's hard to track. So what would you say, how to first of all measure a return on investment on this type of campaign? Because to appear in Bloomberg is nice,
Yeah.
but the question is what was the results that drove, apart from market presence, if it did. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And second thing, how do you build those goals to achieve them?
Yeah, so big question. So the questions are about how to measure that this is successful as a segue to proving that this is worth our investment compared to like building another feature. So I'll answer the more straightforward one first about measuring this. So if we go back to this, so this is an example where the data analysis was the core of the campaign, but then it was just a marketing campaign running on email and our blog and a webinar and so on. So for example, we sent out this email that featured this report based on our data analysis, and we would track, at this point it was with Marketo, how many people clicked the email, for example. Or if we did a webinar, we tracked in a pretty straightforward way how many people attended the webinar. And also we track them through the entire funnel. So suppose you attended the webinar, you became a sales opportunity, you closed.
So you utilize as a content for like kind of direct content
Right.
marketing, not for PR so much. Like
So
you leverage that, like the results came from your direct campaigns.
that's just harder to measure. So press is notoriously just hard to measure, right? You can still try, you should always strive to measure it. So when you get on the phone with people, you should ask them, how did you hear about us? And sometimes you get like anecdotal evidence that people tell you, oh, I saw the Bloomberg article and so on. It's not, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of you here are like engineers, you're super quantitative. It's very hard. Like you're not gonna be able to track it 100%. And with press and my advice, and we're going to talk a bit about it in the next presentation, but my advice to CEOs when we talk about marketing budgets is to dedicate a certain percentage of your budget, I would say 20%, to things that are just like impossible to measure. Even when I was at Amazon, there was a portion of the budget which was called fixed marketing as opposed to variable, which Amazon just said, we're not able to measure it. but we believe it's the right thing long term for the brand, and it does bring in business eventually that we're going to invest on
So
it,
let's
in
look
it.
at first 1 second. In direct marketing, how much better this content was converting than regular content marketing, which is what probably most of the people
like
here do.
orders of magnitude. At some point, we almost stopped doing like regular content. And we have a session about content later, but I would say that at some point the only content we did was this and customer-based content. So case studies, interviewing a customer, everything else, like the 10 things you need to do for your holiday campaign. We stopped doing that completely because it just didn't work for us. Cool, so I want to show you the second case study. So this is an Israeli startup called Kiwi. When we started working with them about 2 years ago, 30 people, no marketing, and this is just a similar story. So what Kiwi does, they work with publishers to help them distribute their content on Facebook. So it's not an analytics company, despite that, it's a data-driven, AI-related company. And sorry, someone's typing, and it's just. Do you mind? Thank you. Okay, so what we did with Kiwi has a ton of information about how publishers' content performs on Facebook. We get access to all of this data, all of their Facebook pages, again, ton of data. And you can see some of the analysis that we did. So this one, which was really successful, we essentially looked at how much money publishers are spending on Facebook over time. And you can see that in the past 2 years, it more than doubled. That was like the big message here. And we did it by vertical. So if you're a food publisher versus like a sports publisher. And as you can see here, we only pitched this to one publication, which I'm sure most of you haven't even heard of it, because I haven't before Kiwi. It's called Digiday. But if you're in publishing, in digital publishing, you read Digiday. It's like the Wall Street Journal of people in publishing. So we only pitched it to Digiday, and they took it and they published it. You can see in this example, they literally took our charts and published them as is with our logo and so on. We did some analysis prior to the Super Bowl, how people are engaging with Super Bowl content. We did some stuff around Trump and the election. So whenever there was something timely, we kind of latched onto that. That's called sometimes news hijacking. But this was more like our own doing. So we just did the analysis, and that's something that we also update on a quarterly-ish basis. And we just pitched it to Digiday. We got a ton of feedback that people were reading it and seeing it, and we keep doing it. And by the way, here, this analysis, for example, is now done by the marketing team. So Kiwi has they opened access to some of the data through like essentially SQL, and we trained someone on the marketing team to run the SQL analysis to do that. So right now, it's not even like a data scientist. It's like a person on the marketing team doing the analysis.
But in this case, what was the conversion? How did it reflect in terms of the effect? Okay, so many people read and saw the Kiwi name.
Mm-hmm.
There it stopped, or do you have some figures about, no, we gained X users, X customers, a deal came through this publication?
Yeah, so I'm going to show you in a beta campaign we did at Kiwi based on these campaigns. So again, press, you are not going to be able to measure conversions off of press, because Digiday, for example, they have a policy of not linking. You say, like, this doesn't link to Kiwi. So even if someone read this and was like, oh, wow, Kiwi sounds amazing, and they went to kiwi.co and asked for a demo, you're not going to know unless you ask them.
Kiwi.com during this publication? Or
yeah, but I mean, the numbers are not that big, so that, you know, it's not like a crazy pick, because this is super targeted. So I would not, you know, you have to believe with press. It's hard because we're all quantitative, but like I said, press is a channel that's notoriously hard to measure. What you do measure is what I just showed you before, which is all of these campaigns, and I'm going to show you in a bit how we leveraged this. Sorry. Oh. How we leveraged the Kiwi data analysis in an email campaign that's been super impactful and is measurable. So I'm going to show you some numbers from there. Like both of you said earlier, this is something that you need to experiment with, start very small. If you see some seeds of interest and traction and leads, you should double down. If it's not working, then yes, this is an investment like anything else. But
do you use any content distribution?
Usually, you mean paid?
Yes.
No,
Like
usually we don't, but we experimented, and for us it didn't work as well. We also have a big email database of our own by now. We have about 30,000 people in our own mailing list. So, and we think it's a good representation of our target audience. But I'm in favor of experimenting with paid distribution too. It's expensive. So that does need to perform.
Who's your audience? Sorry, maybe I missed that.
Kiwi sells to big publishers in the US mostly. Cool. Okay, so I just want to summarize what we talked about quickly. We need to start with data. I think most of us here are fortunate because we work at startups where we do have access to a lot of somewhat proprietary data that's interesting, at least to our target audience. It does not need to be interesting for the Wall Street Journal specifically. Then some data, I put science in brackets because what we did for the polls, it's not even data science, it's just analysis and statistics that sometimes the marketing team can do on its own. And you start small, you start manual, you don't invest, you don't make it a full-fledged product to begin with. You start with some one-off analysis, you see what works, what's interesting. If it works, then you grow and double down and automate. If it's not, then you try something else, or maybe you stop. Distribution, PR is amazing if it works. It's always a crapshoot, you don't know. And it's also hard to measure. Your own database is great. So at Kastora, the database grew from 4,000 people to about 40 in 3 years. At Kiwi, similar numbers. And then you market to them with email marketing and partnerships, not just for data journalism, but in general. I highly recommend partnering even as a startup as small as like 5 people. And we're going to talk more about it a bit later.
What about YouTube? I don't see YouTube as one of your channels.
We didn't really produce video content because it's expensive and hard. So at the stage that we were in back then, we just didn't do it. I think if you can pull it off, yeah, could be cool. Nowadays, when we have someone from the company speaking at a conference or talking about one of these topics, we would put it on YouTube, but and then promote it with email and so on. I haven't done almost any like paid YouTube campaigns, or I haven't done a lot of video production.
And AdWords and Google?
Yeah, it's a good question. We are going to talk a bit more about it in the next session, but honestly, I haven't seen a ton of success with paid online media for B2B. But I'm happy to hear other thoughts. It's just very expensive, and unless you...
Online media, what do you mean?
Google AdWords, LinkedIn, even retargeting. With bigger companies, we still do them because at some point you just need to. But the economics, when we were a tiny startup with a very tight budget, it was very expensive for us. And the funnel needs to work, but we're going to talk a bit more about it in the next presentation.
And GDPR impact on
You were asking great questions, but you were like basically summarizing our entire workshop into like 5 questions. So we have like presentations about each one of these topics, but it's great questions. Cool. So what we're going to do now is an exercise where you can work in pairs or small teams or also individually, and you're going to brainstorm a few ideas where data analysis and data journalism can apply to what your startup is doing. Hopefully you got some inspiration on where this can apply for your company. And if not, maybe the brainstorm can help. Cool. So let's do it. Don't be shy.